All right, good evening, all, and thank you for your patience as everyone joins our call. We'll be getting started in just a moment. All right, welcome to our MPF webinar, An Evening with Owls of both Prairies and Parks, with Mark H.X. Glenshaw, an award-winning naturalist, and so much more. My name is Amanda Lands-Bramrap, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native program. Thank you all for joining us for this special evening webinar today. Take a moment to get comfortable and cozy, like I have, while I run through a few webinar fundamentals. When you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A section of Zoom, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. Lily Grimmeroth, our MPF Conservation Program Associate, will join Mark on screen at the end of the presentation to read your submitted questions aloud for the Q&A session. Lily always does a nice job of synthesizing questions aloud for that Q&A session so we can cover as much ground as possible. All of you have our gratitude in advance for your thoughtful live submissions and for those we've already received by email ahead of the event. Now I'd like to introduce Mark H.X. Glenshaw. To begin with, Mark is a native of Washington, D.C., with dual citizenship as an American and South African. He received his bachelor's degree in history with a minor in communications and journalism from Washington University in St. Louis. When not studying owls, Mark works at the University of Missouri St. Louis in the Advancement Division. Since 2005, he has closely observed and documented the lives of great horned owls in Forest Park, a large urban park in St. Louis, Missouri. He shares his work on his blog, Forest Park Owls, as well as on social media channels. Mark does extensive outreach work with the owls. He leads dozens of tours called Owl Prowls in Forest Park each year. He also gives scores of talks across Missouri, Illinois, and beyond to a wide range of organizations and institutions. Over the years, he's given presentations for over 20 Audubon Society chapters, 70 libraries, as well as 6 presentations for the Smithsonian Institution. In 2006, he was awarded the Citizen Scientist Award by the Academy of Science in St. Louis. Mark is a certified interpretive guide, a certified Missouri Master Naturalist, and a volunteer for Forest Park Forever. The owls and his work with them receive regular coverage from local and regional media. They even had their first national media coverage with an appearance in 2022 on the E! Entertainment Network. Thank you for joining us, Mark. Now we'll all settle in and turn things over to you for tonight's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Amanda. Lily, I look forward to doing Q&A with you. I really want to thank Amanda, Lily, the entire staff and board of the Missouri Prairie Foundation for hosting this program tonight. I'm really excited to be presenting for them for the first time. But my biggest thanks go to all of you who are watching tonight. I know how precious time is on a weeknight evening, so thank you for sharing part of your evening to learn more about owls. I always like to start with a few quick reassurances. And the first one is that even with Amanda's really kind introduction still ringing in your ears, I think it's important that I reassure you that I'm the right person to be here tonight to talk to you about owls. And I say this because you are all undoubtedly noticing the appalling and ever growing lack of hair on my head. And so I think it's important that I reassure you that I do study owls and not bald eagles. Now, I love to see a bald eagle, fascinating, beautiful animals, our national bird, our national symbol. And this is one that I photographed in the territory of the great horned owls that I study. And so I'd love to see a bald eagle, but I just want to reassure you, I really concentrate my energies, my time and effort on studying owls. I also want to say a quick reassurance about clothes. You're seeing me here in the proper attire to present for you lovely folks and for such an august organization. But just want to reassure you, this is not what I wear when I go out to study owls. This is what I look like when I go out to study owls. Dark, muted colors. You never see me wearing a bright blue shirt or jacket or anything like that. and all the proper gear, boots, cameras, binoculars, and yes, the car with the license plate Owlman. That's my car. And I know we have some sharp-eyed birders, naturalists, gardeners, and other observant folks watching tonight. And you're probably noticing that the facial hair in the photo matches the facial hair streaming over the internet to you tonight. And what you're seeing in both cases is winter plumage. And in about May, I'll shave this down to a goatee, creating spring plumage. And then when we get to June or so, I shave it all off, and there we have summer plumage. So, with these reassurances in mind, we can get to our topic tonight. And we're going to start with the owls that you can find in prairies in Missouri. And there are three species that are really prairie and grassland specialists that can be found in Missouri. And these are barn owls, short-eared owls, and burrowing owls. And before we look at each species, I just want to pause here and talk to you a little bit about taxonomy, how we classify owls, because there are two families of owls, and the three owls we're going to talk about tonight, and the fourth we'll talk about later tonight. Uh, Three of them are in one family of owls, and the other is in the second family of owls. So three of the owls are in the family called Strigidae, also known as the typical owls. Things like short-eared owls, barred owls. There's a short-eared, there's a barred, great-horned, and yes, burrowing. They're all in Strigidae. And then we have the second family, Titonidae, and that includes barn owls and their relatives. So I just wanted to share that little bit of taxonomy and classification. They're all owls, but they are in these different families. So we're going to look at barn owls first. And they're a decent sized owl. They're not tiny, but they're not huge. So a foot to just under a foot and a half tall. And this might surprise some of you. They are very light, just under a pound, sometimes just 1.5 pounds. And some of you may not be surprised by this, but some of you might be surprised at how little they weigh. And this is because birds that fly, their bones are hollow. And of course, feathers are as light as a feather. So that's a heavy bird. You know, if you had a mammal a foot to just under a foot and a half tall, that mammal would weigh double digits. But that's a pretty heavy bird. So it's all about context. Just like 6'2" is really short in the National Basketball Association. In my family, where we peak out at 5'11", that would be a giant. So just want to comment a bit on the weight there. And they also have brown eyes, and they are one of only two species in Missouri that have brown owls. And so we have barn owls with brown and barred owls with brown eyes. So good thing to note there. And barn owls are quite a specialist. They really like to eat rodents, very much voles, but they'll also dine on other things as well, usually on the smaller side. So they'll eat different animals, but they are incredible rodent specialists and very beneficial to agriculture and things where rodents can be a challenge. And nest sites, barn owls are quite heavy users of man-made places like barns, old buildings, silos. Their name barn owl is not accidental. In Dutch, the Dutch common name for barn owls is church owls because they will use churches as well. But barn owls will also use natural cavities like this tree here. And barn owls have to use an enclosed space. They're not as powerfully prepared for very cold weather. Very cold weather can kill them, weather that other owls can endure without much difficulty. Barn owls have to have, not just for babies, but also just for sleeping, generally a covered, protected cavity or contained space. When it comes to having youngsters, barn owls can be quite prolific, 4 to 6 on average, and they can have as little as two, but sometimes as many as 11. And barn owls also do something that very few good-sized birds of prey can do. They can have multiple clutches, multiple groups of eggs a year. Now, of course, that depends on things like weather and prey availability, but every other owl we're going to talk about today can have one clutch once a year. That's it. But if barn owls in the right space, right environment, they can have two and sometimes three clutches, which is quite impressive. Our next and there's another view of a young barn owl. The eggs, one emerged from eggs, a few still waiting to hatch, and they do lay their eggs. All owls lay their eggs at different times, and the eggs generally hatch in the order in which they were laid. So we see one hatched here, another is not hatched. If we look at back the previous photo, we can see differences in size and maturation. So our next species will be the short-eared owl, but I also want to say a few words about the geographic range of barn owls, and they are all over the place. One of the most widespread on the planet. Now, this is not all the exact same species of barn owls. There are various subspecies, various related species. The taxonomy of barn owls with this huge geographic range gets quite tricky in preparing for this talk. I was reading one book that said, "Oh no, the American barn owl is it's its own separate species, not a subspecies, its own species." And I pick up another book, and I have over 50 books on owls. You can see some of them behind me. The other book, also very reputable, says no, barn owls in America are not a separate subspecies. So finding them almost anywhere you're going to have grasses and not just American prairie, but grasslands of any good size and type. And so in Missouri, do want to talk about them here. They are statewide and year round. They don't migrate. So you're going to find them in all regions of Missouri, a little more as you see on the western side and the southeastern side. And they are a non-migratory species. And their status in Missouri has improved greatly. It's very stable now, but it was quite bad for many years. It improved to a species of conservation concern after being endangered, and then with a lot of captive breeding and artificial nest boxes, the population of Missouri has improved. So that is definitely a win. And so from barn owls, we're going to go to a slightly larger owl, the short-eared owl, which is just over a foot to just under 2 feet, just under a foot and a half. And being bigger than the barn owl at height, they do weigh a little more. So just under half a pound to just over a pound. And again, that's heavy for a bird. And we see this barn owl in flight, and they have very buoyant flight with very exceptionally long, thin wings compared to their body size. Quite distinctive from other owls. You would seen a short-eared owl fly, you would never say, "Oh, there's a great horned owl," or "There's a barn owl." You would never mistake it for that. And do want to say a word about their ears. You see these two little things on top of their heads. Well, the names of some owls, like short-eared owls, the long-eared owls, get a little confusing because those are not ears. They are just groups of feathers called tufts. Owls' ears are found at the same height as their eyes, and they're always covered in feathers, so you can't see an owl's ears. And yes, if you're looking for a good word for your next game of Scrabble or impress your friends, there is a more technical term for tufts, and that is plumicorns. So short-eared owls are short plumicorn owls, and very often invisible, as you've already seen in a couple of pictures of short-eared owls. They're quite small, in contrast to the great horned owl and the long-eared owl. So with short-eared owls, also very much a rodent specialist. Voles are a huge part of their diet, but they will branch out as well, and sometimes getting up to some decent-sized birds in places where you have short-eared owls and a lot of shorebirds. They sometimes will snack on those shorebirds quite a bit, but primarily a rodent specialist like the barn owl. Nest sites are also pretty neat with short-eared owls. They kind of form a rough, flattened bowl of the places of the vegetation around them. They live in grasslands and prairies, so they'll flatten out a bowl of that grassland or marsh vegetation. It's not a very formal nest in the way we generally think with birds, but it's definitely something that very few owls do. And I'll mention that as well when we talk about the burrowing owl. And the number of young can vary quite a bit, depending on prey availability and things like that. So averages of 5 to 6, but over 10 sometimes. So that's really, really interesting. That's a lot of babies to feed. So if you're seeing a short-eared owl with, 8, 9 young, the hunting is going well. Continuing with short-eared owls, there's some of their babies with a mom. We can see their geographic range also very large, very much similar to the barn owl being one of the most widespread. And yes, like the barn owl, various species and subspecies. There's even a subspecies of both barn owls and short-eared owls, endemic to the Galapagos Islands off the western coast of South America. So short-eared owls are found throughout good chunks of the world. In Missouri, they are statewide, but they are a migratory species. They come in, they spend time here, and then they head out. And we are in one of the best times to go see your short-eared owls, and that's within the range of October to March. So here we are in early December, and people are seeing short-eared owls in the prairies and other habitats that can support them. Some short-eared owls occasionally nest in Missouri, but generally here for a span of time, and then off they go. So if you want to see a short-eared owl, you definitely want to think about timing very carefully. They are a species of conservation concern. They are not endangered, but they are not thriving and healthy as they could be. So definitely habitat preservation and restoration is key to them. And we're going to finish with our prairie owls by looking at the burrowing owl. Quite a small little guy, just over half an inch to half a foot to well under a foot tall and less than half a pound. And yeah, diet, lots and lots of insects, but also other things as well. Again, owls are opportunistic predators. They will eat and catch what they can, generally depending on their size, of course. But burrowing owls definitely do quite a bit of nibbling on invertebrates, but also get into the vertebrates as well. And their nest site is, yeah, their name is quite accurate. They nest in a hole in the ground, generally a hole that's been dug by another animal, badger, groundhog, prairie dog, gopher. But burrowing owls will do some renovations, and sometimes in places where they don't have an animal that has dug a hole, they will dig their own nests. So with short-eared owls, these are one of the few owls to actually make a nest. Owls almost categorically do not make an pardon me, do not make a nest. And it's a really interesting thing because you think, oh, bird, what makes a bird? Oh, they have a beak, they have feathers, some fly, some don't, but they make a nest. And owls are like, I didn't take that class in high school, or I was sick that week. So the fact that burrowing owls and short-eared owls will make or partially make a nest is pretty unusual in owls. Burrowing owls also have a healthy number of youngsters, averaging 7 to 9, but sometimes 10 plus. And they will often group in semi-colonial fashion, kind of, and sometimes families will kind of intermix, like, okay, you're going over to the neighbor's house, and they'll watch you for a while we go and hunt. And this is pretty unusual with owls. There are very few owl species that group together in groups larger than a nuclear family, mom, dad, junior, and sis. That's generally the case for most owls. And a group of owls, in case you're wondering, is called a parliament of owls. And studying great horned owls who are in pairs or pairs with young, I've never said, oh, look, there's a parliament of great horned owls. It's just something that doesn't or rarely happens. With barred owls, you have to know that all owls can be quite comedic to watch, but burrowing owls are especially comedic to watch. with their head tilts and large family groups, everyone kind of doing something different at the same time. So they can be a lot of fun to watch. Uh, Geographic range, not as widespread as the two owl species we've looked at, but still quite good throughout much of the Americas. There's a well-known population, isolated population in Florida. In Missouri, very isolated in Missouri, west central to southwestern Missouri, and only rarely, occasionally, infrequently, whatever word you want to use, but you're not going to see them all that much. I had been studying owls for 7 years before I ever heard someone say a sentence saying, I saw a burrowing owl in Missouri. It happened to be one of the amazing photographers for the Missouri Department of Conservation, but I had just never even heard of them. So they'll pop up occasionally. It's a very rare treat to see one. So if you go to a prairie, I wouldn't expect to see a burrowing owl, but maybe you'll get very lucky. Now we're going to transition from prairies to a park, and not just any park, but where I study great horned owls. And I think it's important to give this background on this place. And yeah, it's called Forest Park in St. Louis, Missouri, because I might be talking to folks all over the state and perhaps beyond. And I don't want to assume if you're in Kirksville or St. Joseph or Joplin or Rolla that you've been to St. Louis, that you've been to Forest Park. Somebody from Springfield, Missouri came up to St. Louis and said, "Oh, I'm going to talk to you about the black vultures that we have in the Springfield area." I'd be like, "Cool, tell us about that area where you see the black vultures." So to look at Forest Park, let's zoom out to a look of much of North America and then zoom into Missouri and its neighbors. And St. Louis is in east central Missouri, so right on the far eastern side of the state, but pretty much right in the middle, north and south. And when we zoom into St. Louis, of course, the border with Illinois is this little creek called the Mississippi something or another. And if we look pretty much in the middle of St. Louis, north and south, but on the west side, you see this big patch of land, and that is Forest Park. So let's zoom into Forest Park, and we can see how truly urban it is. Its southern border here, this is US Interstate 64. So it's very much right in the middle of the city. And a few fast facts about Forest Park. It is indeed really big. It's just under 1,300 acres, making it 500 acres larger than Central Park in New York City. People love Forest Park. It's an oasis of calm and peace and nature away from the busy city. And it's also home to several of the St. Louis region's major cultural and educational institutions. Right here in the middle of the photo is the St. Louis Art Museum, and just over to the left, to the east, is the St. Louis Zoo. And these are just two of such institutions. So between these institutions and the park itself, people come to Forest Park in huge numbers. 15.5 million visitors a year use Forest Park. And to put that figure into context, the population of Missouri is right around 6 million people. So quite a large number. It's a very well regarded park as well, not just by locals, but by people throughout the country and the world, as you see from this list of recent awards and accolades from national media outlets and national organizations. And the park does have, when it comes to its landscapes, it has park-like things, turf grass, playing fields, horticultural areas, but also excellent habitat diversity with two types of forests, lakes, creeks, streams, and yes, prairies, savannas, wetlands, and woodlands, and approximately 47,000 trees put the forest in Forest Park. And as you might imagine, with this great habitat diversity, we have excellent species diversity, not only of things that grow in the ground, but things that fly in the air, swim in the water, and so forth. Just with birds, over 200 species of birds have been documented in Forest Park. And with this background in the park in mind, I want to give a little background about great horned owls that both in general and the ones I study. And as you heard from Amanda, I have been studying great horned owls in Forest Park since December 2005. And my work is focused on a pair of great horned owls that I named Charles and Sarah. And here are Charles and Sarah together, Charles lower on the left, Sarah higher on the right. And like all, I almost said all, pardon me, I'm going to rephrase that. Like the vast majority of the birds of prey, uh, great horned owls, there's a difference in size between male and female. And this is indeed with the other three species we've looked at. Females are larger than males. So definitely want to mention that. And how big are great horned owls? Well, definitely great in size, far bigger than all other three species we've looked at. Third tallest owl in North America, 18 to 25 inches tall, so a foot and a half to just over 2 feet tall. Being so tall means they are indeed quite heavy. Second heaviest owl in North America, coming in at 2 to 5 pounds. So a very heavy bird. And yes, the females are larger, and you can see that Charles on the left, a big male, Sarah on the right, huge female. Great horned owls are also the most widespread, commonly found owl in North America. They are found in every state except Hawaii, every province and territory of Canada, and there's more. They're also found throughout much of Latin America. So this is one of the largest geographic ranges of any bird of prey on the planet. And out of this huge geographic range comes an interesting situation. On one hand, great horned owls are really easy to study because you can find them in almost every habitat in the Americas. But at the same time, living in almost every habitat in the Americas, that makes them really hard to study and generalize about. Because just taking our friend the letter A, this is an owl that lives in Alaska, Alberta, Arizona, Arkansas, Alabama, and I've run out of fingers, Argentina. So with great horned owls, there are huge variations in what they eat, where and when they nest, population density, how many live in an area, and territory size. So these are key things to keep in mind. When they have young, they average 2 to 3 owlets. And yes, like the short-eared owl, they have tufts or plumicorns, much more visible than the short-eared owl. And so to study the owls, I go out very frequently. I was just out there tonight, yes, in the freezing cold. An average night, I'm there 6 to 7 nights a week, over 300 nights a year. And this gives me a lot of information to work with. It's also completely addicting to study these guys. Timing is very key. I go out about an hour before sunset, and this is when the owls are starting to wake up and become active. And it's also very important that I wear the right clothes and I have the right gear, as you saw in that photo when we started. And so going out about an hour before sunset, I get to see a wide range of different behaviors, including the owls sleeping. Before they wake up, they're still sleeping. And even after they wake up, they will hit the snooze button sometimes. So here's Sarah sleeping away. As they begin to wake up, they do what we all do. Animals always stretch and groom. And this is Charles doing one of two incredible stretches of their wings. This is what I call the escalator stretch. And what you're seeing there, that massive expanse of wing and feathers, that is only one wing. The wingspan of a great horned owl, 4 to 5 feet wide. They'll also stretch both wings over their feathers. They will also groom. And here's Charles demonstrating the amazing neck flexibility that all owls have. He is grooming his tail feathers with his bill, with his beak, with his mouth. I don't know about you guys, but I can't scratch my shoulder with my nose with my shoulder. So incredible flexibility, and the grooming or preening helps keep them clean, dry, warm, and their feathers in good shape so they can fly silently. As they will start to wake up, especially in this time of year, they will hoot together. When owls hoot together, it's called a duet. It's how they declare and defend territory, how a new pair courts, and how a new pair and established pair builds and maintains their pair bond. Now, we've talked about the difference in size, but you can't always tell the difference in size between any species of owl. This photo, Charles is much closer to my camera Then Sarah, who, while bigger than Charles, is farther away from my camera, so it's harder to tell who is bigger, but their hoots are quite different. Male great horned owl, as you can see on the screen, a much different hoot from the female. Now you might be saying, hey, the female has higher notes than the male? I thought she was bigger. Wouldn't the female great horned owl sound, since the male sounds like a French horn, wouldn't a female sound like a tuba or sousaphone? Well, the females are bigger overall, but their heads are more narrow and their vocal cords are smaller, and that produces the higher pitched hoot. So beautiful to see and hear them duet together. They will then go off to hunt, and finding them again when they go off to hunt is very, very challenging, but it's incredibly rewarding. It's very challenging because great horned owls fly 20 to 40 miles per hour. And like most owls, they fly completely silent, and their camouflage makes them hard to find when we have daylight still to work with. But when they go out to hunt, it's getting darker and darker by the second. It's often very hard to find them again. But I've put in a lot of time and effort to learn how and where to find them, and that effort has been very rewarded with moments and sights like this. A beautifully silhouetted great horned owl, in this case, Sarah, hunting. And she's doing the main method of great horned owl hunting, which is perch and wait and look and listen. Very patient hunters. And so all the owls we've looked at so far, real rodent specialists, also dipping their toes, their talons into other types of animals. Well, great horned owls eat a really wide range of animals. Yes, mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and insects, but within that, some not so small things. Great horned owls eat raccoons. Great horned owls eat skunks. They eat muskrats, groundhogs, minks. Great horned owls eat ducks, geese, hawks, other owls. Every owl that we've looked at tonight, great horned owls can eat them. Great horned owls will even sometimes eat the two species larger than themselves. And not just babies either, adults of those species. Great horned owls will eat the fastest animal on the planet, peregrine falcons. Great horned owls will eat herons and egrets, including great blue herons that are twice their size. Great horned owls eat ospreys. Pet owners, a serious word of caution. Great horned owls eat domestic cats, they eat small dogs. In Forest Park, in much of our region as a whole throughout Missouri, there's only a handful of things they cannot eat. Adult fox, adult coyote, white-tailed deer, bald eagle, that's it. Everything else is on the menu. Now, I was totally shocked by this when I began to study owls. I knew very little about owls, but I thought, okay, I know about other animals. They're probably going to eat rabbits and rodents and small birds. And I had no idea that great horned owls were at the top of the food chain. So it's amazing to watch them hunt. And thankfully, the hunting in Forest Park is very good because there have been many mouths to feed. Since 2006, Charles and Sarah have had 23 owlets. These are the three they had in 2014. And here's another group of three, again, averaging 2 to 3. A few owlet highlights. 2008 was the first year that I saw Charles and Sarah have three owlets, and it was the first year that I named the owlets. And I named them Bart, Lisa, and Maggie because, yes, I am a big fan of The Simpsons, but also for good scientific reasons. As I mentioned earlier, owls lay their eggs at different times, and the female will start to incubate the very first egg. They don't wait for all the eggs to be laid. They lay their first egg, boom, incubation begins. So I wanted names that gave me that age order. 2012 brought one of my favorite owlet photos when they had these two beautiful little guys, Christopher and Velvet. And feel free to go, oh, or however you react to insanely cute animals. The following year was three owlets again, and another one of my favorite owlet photos. when they had Lawrence, Edward, and Stuart. And I love this photo because it takes me back to that beautiful May day when I walked into their territory, and there they were. But here they are in May, and man, can you see that difference in maturation? The oldest Owlet, Lawrence, is over here on the right, looking much, much, much more like an adult, especially compared to the youngest one, Stuart, on the right. Pardon me, on the left. I don't know my right from my left. And right in the middle is the middle child. And not only did they hatch in age order, but they fledged in age order, and then eventually they have to leave the parents' territory, and they that's called dispersal. And dispersal happened in age order as well. Most recently, Charles and Sarah had two Owlets in 2015, Grace and Harold, and here's Sarah feeding them an eastern cottontail rabbit. And I'd really like to show this photo of the owlets being fed by Sarah because it demonstrates the incredible way that many birds of prey grow. And just to give specific examples with great horned owls, you are looking at owlets that are not much smaller than their mom. Those owlets are 2 months old. And great horned owls hatch from an egg about the size of the chicken eggs in your fridge. And they hatch from this egg and explode in size. In 2 months, they will be 80% adult height and weight. But there's a curveball. Their bodies go like this, but their abilities to fly and land better, and who eventually be able to feed themselves when the parents provide them food, never mind catch their own prey. Those abilities take a very long time to catch up. So, with that long maturation process, one thing we can generalize about with great horned owls is that they're one of if not the very earliest bird to nest anywhere you have great horned owls, whether it's Missouri, whether it's Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, Manitoba, or Mexico. Around Missouri, great horned owls will start nesting as early as December, frequently in December. Of course, geographic variations and so forth. So always want to stress that. So it's amazing to watch the owlets slowly, slowly mature. And it's always exciting to see owlets and watch them get gradually better. You'll see them on a Monday and you'll see the same behavior on Friday and you'll notice a slight improvement. Now, unfortunately, in 2015, we also had a very sad development when Sarah died. On July 18th, I found her in a very unusual area of her territory. And just as you see in the photo, that's how I found her. From her posture and her expression, I knew she was ill or injured. I found her before sunset, and I stayed with her for an hour after sunset. And instead of grooming and stretching and hooting and flying off to hunt, she just stayed there and ended up being there for over 36 hours. And the last I saw her was the morning of July 20th. And my friends and the people that I mentor about owls, we scoured this area and never found any sign of her. So a very sad time, but there are two very important silver linings because I miss Sarah to this day. I miss her every day. But these silver linings were really important. One was that the owlets, as I mentioned, they eventually have to disperse from the parents' territory, and the parents reach a point to encourage dispersal. The parents reach a point where they stop feeding the owlets. You're done. If any of you have teenagers at home, you might want to write this down. If any of you, say, have a 25-year-old living at home, you might want to initiate that policy tonight. So Charles and Sarah, 2 weeks before she died, had stopped feeding the owlets. If Sarah had died 3 weeks earlier, 6 weeks earlier, 10 weeks earlier, the owlets probably would have died from not having enough food. Once they fledge, both parents have to hunt for them. So that was a very important silver lining, and the owlets eventually dispersed. There are cases of successful single parenthood with great horned owls. That is very much the exception to the rule. Pardon me, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water. The other silver lining was that I had been so lucky to see so much of Charles and Sarah's life together, but I had not seen their courtship. When I came across them, they were already a pair. For how long, I'll never know. And while I had read about great horned owl courtship, I had never seen it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll get to see Charles court and hopefully find a new mate. Well, looking back on it now with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is 2020, I think it's very fair to say that Charles had no idea, and I certainly had no idea what he was in for. And that was a nonstop owl drama whirlwind. It begins and continues. Charles has had 7 mates in the last 8 years. And for some of you, if you're a little shocked at this, I'm going to say to you, please do not start your judgmental engines. Charles has had to have 7 mates in 8 years, as you will see. After Sarah died in July of 2015, he courted with 2 females in September 2015, and it didn't work out with them. Courtship is courtship. Things don't always click with that first person, or in this case, Al, that they courted with. So fascinating to see it not click with them, but thankfully in October, this female showed up, and I named her Olivia. 2 months later, after she arrived, they mated, became a pair, and they mated and mated and mated, but she did not nest. Charles and Sarah had had those 23 owlets in 10 successful consecutive nesting seasons. Charles and Olivia mated and mated, but she never picked a spot and laid eggs. So a very different year that became even more different when she began to spend in the spring of 2016. She began to spend time and distance away from Charles. Olivia did not listen to her record by the country singer Tammy Wynette. Stand by your man. Sorry for the horrible singing on my part. She spent time away from Charles, and a larger, more aggressive female shoved out Olivia. And Olivia was on the small side. She was Charles's size, maybe a touch smaller. So very interesting to see Olivia get shoved out. This new female was so aggressive, she had shoved out Olivia. She even began to chase Charles around. There is only one name I can give this female, and that was Samantha. And she was there and stayed there until she sadly died in April 2019. But in the time she was with Charles, they tried incredibly hard to have young. In 3 years, they had not 3 nesting attempts, but 5 nesting attempts. 2 separate nesting attempts in 2018 and 2019. So they worked very hard to have young, but they did not have young successfully. So after she died, I wondered if Charles would have a long period of singlehood. Well, 2 days after she died, this female showed up. And another large female like Sarah, huge female, I should say. And this one I named Danielle. And they had a nesting attempt in 2020, and unfortunately, the nest failed at a key time when the eggs were about to hatch or just had hatched. The raccoons got into the nest. And a month after the nest failed, in February of 2020, Danielle just disappeared. We have no idea what happened with her. If she left, if she died just there one day, gone the next, and never seen or heard again. And I should note, not only are the calls of male and female great horned owls distinct by sex, but they're also distinct by individuals. Danielle had one of the most unique female great horned owl hoots I've ever heard. Really, really interesting hoot. So after Danielle disappeared, Charles had usually been single briefly. That was not to be the case. He was single for pretty much all of the remainder of 2020. And finally, with a lot of work and some competition, Charles got a new mate in January 2021. This lovely lady here, who I named Sophie. And thankfully, this was one of those things where everything worked out, not just becoming a pair, but they had Owlets in 2021, Neil and Lyle. And so our first, just to reemphasize, the first time we observed the owlets, we heard them in the nest was March 2nd and 3rd. Again, super early nesting birds. I mean, most birds in Missouri are not thinking about nesting, never mind already having nested and the young hatched in early March. They're like, yeah, April, May, June, we'll see you then. So not only did they have owlets in 2021, thankfully they had two owlets again in 2022, Betty and Sydney, and even earlier nesting that year. First time we heard and saw the owlets was on February 4th and 6th. So again, very, very early nesting birds. And really cool to see owlets again in 2021 and 2022 after many years of having owlets and then many years of not having owlets. But again, we had another curveball when Sophie just disappeared. We haven't seen her since June 8th of 2022. And Charles was single, not for a brief time, but not for a long time, like in 2020. His single days ended when this female showed up in September of 2022, and I named her Virginia. And she and Charles mated, and she started to nest in early December. It's the earliest nesting commencement I've ever seen. But sadly, she died very early in the nesting period. And again, Charles single, but literally the a week, just under a week after we last saw Virginia, another female showed up. Female who I named Tess, like Sarah and Danielle, a huge female. But she was somewhat of a traditional girl. She did not move into the territory until March of 2023, but they were courting in the meantime. But also in the meantime, without a female in residence, other female great horned owls, two and very likely three other female great horned owls, were courting with Charles. I've never had that same problem. Charles is an especially gorgeous great horned owl, and his territory is perfect. And so we were hopeful that Charles and Tess would mate and nest, and unfortunately, Tess disappeared just over a year ago. And at that point in November, they were knocking on the door of the time period for mating and nesting. And unfortunately, the only reasonable conclusion that I can draw is that Tess probably died. Uh, and we did not see her again. Charles, again, single only briefly, when a new female showed up last November and began to be seen more consistently in early December. A very young female, and we knew this female was young by her behavior on several different fronts. And when I say young, I mean about a year old. And some female great horned owls will nest in their first year. Most male and female great horned owls will begin to nest when they're 2 to 3 years old. So we knew this female was very young. I think Charles made a pretty conscious decision that you're lovely and everything and fantastic and cool, but you still don't know what you're doing yet. So no mating last year. They had the full window to mate and nest, but it never happened. And given Charles's growing age and her youth, I named her May because it is indeed a May December romance. I named her May for a few other reasons as well. So we are here's Charles and May duetting, hooting together last winter, and here they are duetting earlier this fall. And tonight they had a very healthy duet. And last night and tonight they visited potential nest sites, places that have not been used as nests before in my 18 years of studying Charles and company. So we are hopeful that they will mate and nest, but we have to take everything one night, one day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year at a time. Let's just see what happens. Now, I want to just say a few words about owls and ecology and habitat. And owls are really important parts of a healthy environment, healthy ecology. They are hugely important in controlling populations of rodents and, as we've seen, many other animals. And here's Charles hunting behind an almost full moon last year. And since owls are so beautiful and fascinating, they're often excellent animal and environmental ambassadors that can people will get often more quickly interested in an owl than they would say other animals. Unfortunately, we have our biases. Um, but owls are also really healthy indicators of healthy habitat. Owls need a lot of food. They need, some of them are very specific in what type of habitat they will use. But even a habitat generalist, like a great horned owl, they need healthy habitat. And they're very adaptable, for example, great horned owls are, but still, you need quality habitat. And keeping habitats healthy is really key to keep habitat, whether it's prairies or forests or woodlands or wetlands, keeping that territory, that habitat intact or restoring it is more and more important with every day. Where I first found Charles and Sarah Forest Park was just started to undergo transformation in the early 2000s. For years and years before that, it was turf grass and trees. It was pretty, it was nice, but through a lot of restoration work done by Forest Park Forever, the nonprofit conservancy that, in partnership with the city of St. Louis, maintains, sustains, and restores Forest Park. That area that was turf grass and trees is now trees and a complex of savanna and woodlands and wetlands. And I have to think back, wow, what did this place look like in 1997 or even 2003? And oh my gosh, look at how amazing this place is, and more plant and animal diversity from that. So keeping things intact is very important, and so is restoration. And so the work of the Missouri Prairie Foundation is incredibly important and has produced amazing results in their almost 60 years of history. And I encourage you to join and support groups like that, whether it's statewide, nationwide, worldwide, or very local. If your local park has a friends group or a conservancy, participate, educate yourself, educate other folks. And owls really need these healthy habitats. Here's Charles a couple of winters ago, because these healthy habitats support everything. If you've got a healthy habitat with a diverse communities of plants that supports lots of different invertebrates, these invertebrates support other mammals and birds, as well as other vertebrates and invertebrates. And these become food for owls. So you can have an owl that's a real habitat generalist, like a great horned owl, but short-eared owl, those prairies, those grasslands aren't there. You're just not going to see them. So a lot of people have been seeing in the last several weeks short-eared owls throughout Missouri and other parts of their range. And yeah, it's grassland habitat. And if that habitat is not there and not healthy, you are not going to have short-eared owls. So just really want to stress the importance of restoring habitat, keeping habitat intact, and how all these habitats work together to support the entire food web, food chain, and that owls have such an important role within all of this. I also just want to, in conclusion, say this is just a taste of the wonders of some of the owls found in Missouri. And there are many ways you can learn more about the great horned owls that I study, Charles and Company. First of all, you can ask Missouri Prairie Foundation to host my other owl talks. I have my general talk on the owls, Forest Park owls hiding in plain sight, how I found the owls, basic facts about the species, and then looking at many different behaviors. I have a talk just on hunting and feeding. It's such a meaty subject. And then I have one just on mating, nesting, and owlets. And all of these talks use a lot of my photos and videos. In the interest of time tonight, I did not play any videos, but I have lots of cool videos of the owls. And not just, oh, here's some owl, but no, here's Charles, here's Sarah, here's Olivia, Samantha, here's their babies. And I also have a talk if you want to learn more about how to find your local owls. I have my talk, How to Find an Owl in Your Neighborhood. And as you heard, I do these not only for groups like Missouri Prairie Foundation, but a wide range of organizations and institutions. And I travel all over the place. So if you want to hear more about these guys, please ask MPF to have me back, or please have me come to your part of the world. You can also come out and see the owls. This is a standing invitation for everyone to come to Forest Park and join me on an owl prowl, a 2 hour tour where we start at that key time, about an hour before sunset, go out for 2 hours. And owl prowls happen throughout the year, weekdays, weekends, and I lead a lot of owl prowls, averaging about 70 a year for an owl prowl. To schedule one, I don't have a calendar say, hey, sign up on this date or that date. Just email me 3 to 4 dates that work for you, and we'll find a time that works for both of us, and then we'll set the meetup time. And I take out groups as small as me and one other person, or up to 6 people. If you have 7 people or 47 people, I'm happy to schedule as many owl prowls as possible. So yeah, just send me an email. Don't worry, my email address will be on the last slide as well. And you can also find me online. My blog, my YouTube channel. I co-administer a Facebook community called Great Horned Owls, not a page or a group, but a community. And yes, you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Forest Park Owls. I really want to thank the Missouri Prairie Foundation for hosting me today, Amanda and Lily for facilitating this whole program, the nuts and bolts of it, and making it work. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I'm very happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for your time and interest.
So great, Mark. Thank you so much. I'm sure that there's little claps in all the living rooms across our digital reach tonight, but thank you so much. That was such a joyful talk and was just bringing smiles to my face across it. So thank you so much. It was a joy. I have a few questions. Yeah, streamed in. Folks are, yeah, curious, and I'm just gonna pepper you with some questions if that's okay. I'll start with the end of the talk, the Forest Park story, your great horned owls and all that you knew so personally and recognized individually. Multiple questions were about how you can tell owl from owl, and
Hmm.
between their calls and their how you can tell them apart. Can you just speak to that more? Do they have different faces, or what features do you look for?
Thank you. First of all, for your very kind words about my presentation. I'm thrilled you enjoyed it. I hope everyone did. And thank you for these great questions. Telling them apart can be tricky. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Each owl is distinct. There are different markings. You have the different sizes. You have the different vocalizations. But you also have subtle things like posture and attitude and just how they hold themselves. There's a very technical term that German zoologists have developed for these more subtle things, the vibe. I'm kidding, of course. That's an English word, the vibe. Um, and sometimes it's quite easy, other times it's tough. And not only are the owls different individually, how 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 do you feel today? Did you sleep well? How much did you have a nice lunch? Are you tired? Are you stressed? Are you what have you? And of course, every night, one of the best things about the owls is also one of the most challenging things, and that is every night is different and unique. And that includes light and the angle you have on them. And of course, yes, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And most of the time, I can identify them pretty confidently. There are times where I'm wrong. I had a horrible fail this fall when I saw one of the owls from multiple angles. And I said, yep, there's Charles. There's Charles again. There's Charles. There he is. And all of a sudden, from 60 yards over that way, I heard Charles calling. No, Mark, Charles over there, that's May that you've been watching this whole time. So there are these differences, and you always, whether it's identifying an individual or analyzing behavior, and this applies to anything in nature, you always leave the window cracked that you don't know and you're not sure. Tonight, Charles and May were hooting together. They flew off in the same general direction. I found one of them first. It was quite dark, and I found one of the owls in a very dark and shaded area. And I looked with my binoculars and I said to one of my friends and owl mentees, again, I mentor people about owls, and I said to my friend and owl mentee, Aaron, tonight, I said, I think that's May. And I was 100% wrong. It was Charles. So you get to learn all these different aspects to them, but the second that you say, oh, yes, I know everything, I'm completely no. And this applies to not just saying, oh, there's one, there's the other, but how do you find them? And so a big phrase that I use about all aspects of this is the following: open eyes, open ears, open mind. And that phrase came blazing into my head at, bullet train speed on October 28th, 2007. It's my girlfriend Wendy's birthday, easy day to remember. And I'd been studying the owls for a couple of years. And on this day, I was kind of being lazy. And I wasn't finding Charles in this typical spot or that typical spot or even that typical spot. And I ended up almost getting crapped on by Charles by about 2 to 3 feet. If I had taken another step when he defecated, it would have landed right on me. So, oh my God, that phrase came blazing into my head. Open eyes, open ears, most importantly, open mind. Now, your mouth, you might want to keep that closed.
I love that. Keep the window a little bit open. That's such a great sentiment. One, and thank you for your answer. More questions. We couldn't help but think, is Charles a serial killer? Why do all his ladies keep disappearing? What is going on? Is it typical for females to have a shorter lifespan? Was it an exception to see Charles living for so long? Can you just speak to that a little bit more?
Certainly. Thank you. Those are great questions. And no, Charles is not a serial killer. This is a lot of work for him to do. Great horned owls are monogamous as long as possible. And that's the key phrase, as long as possible. And even with a long-term relationship, I saw Charles and Sarah together for 10 years. That pair bonding that I mentioned through hooting, that never diminished. They had to keep building their pair bond. Again, that breeding cycle is so long. From the time that great horned owls start to mate to the time when the youngsters finally disperse, they leave the parent's territory, that's 7 to 9 months. So that pair bonding is really huge. It's the longest breeding cycle of any owl in North America. You can't do a breeding cycle like that on a first date, singles bar, Tinder basis. You need a big pair bond. So Charles losing mates, oh my God, I got to start all over again. In 2020, when he was single for so long, he just kept being single, and finally he was courting with a female who became eventually known as Sophie, but she got wooed away by another male, and Charles worked really hard to woo her back to him, and thankfully it was successful. Now, with great horned owls, we have that huge geographic range. There is a laundry list of things we don't know about great horned owls, including their average lifespan. We don't know the sex ratio. We don't know, is it 40% male, 60% female, 55% female, 45% male. We don't know if one sex lives longer than the other. Just in contrast to Charles, one of my friends and owl mentees is a lady named Brenda Henty, who's been studying the same female great horned owl for 14 years. And that female is on male mate number 3. Is Charles typical? Is this other female typical? We don't know. And there's still so much we don't know about great horned owls. Owls are tricky to study. Well camouflaged, mostly active at night, fly fast and silently. Yeah, no problem. I did not see my first owl until I was 19. I didn't see another owl until I saw Charles and Sarah 14 years later. I regularly meet people in their 70s and 80s who have never seen an owl in the wild just because they're so hard just to find. So, yeah, great questions about identifying them. And yeah, Charles has to work really, really hard to find his mates. And how has been able to get so many mates? Well, that takes us back to habitat. Great horned owls are these habitat generalists, but still better habitat, better territories are going to be more successful. An exercise that I do when I travel, I look out my window and I'll ask myself, could this work for a pair of great horned owls? And my answer is more often than not is yes, because great horned owls are so adaptable, such generalists. But there's, oh, this would work versus, oh, this is perfect. And Charles's territory in Forest Park is perfect. Charles was a single person at a bar, at a nightclub, Charles was saying, would you like to see my mansion or my penthouse? That gets a lot more traction, a lot more success than I live in my mom's basement.
Yeah, territory matters for sure. We have other questions of regarding territory. How many owls do you think are in Forest Park right now? Or, how many great horned owls? How many can live in that sustained area and how do they divide territory? And yeah, can you speak a little bit to that?
Definitely. Thank you everyone for these questions. And Lily, thank you for synthesizing them. This is fantastic. Right now there are 3 pairs of great horned owls in Forest Park. And what's harder to quantify with most owl species are single owls. Single owls of any species are called floaters. And floaters are often that much harder to find. They sometimes will live in the established territory of another pair of owls, but they keep a very low profile. So right now there are 3 pairs of great horned owls in Forest Park. I haven't 2 of these pairs, Charles and Company, and one other pair, very well established. Second pair is more recent. I haven't. I've learned of the second pair from one of my friends and mentees. I haven't heard any updates about this pair in a couple of weeks, so I don't know their current status. We haven't investigated them as thoroughly. Over the years, we've had a third pair in Forest Park, but in a different area of the park than the third pair is using right now. And this other part of the park where we've had a third pair of great horned owls, it's been very interesting and takes us back to habitat and habitat quality and territory and things like that. The other owls that have been third pair in this different area of the park, we've had them there for days, weeks, and the most I ever saw one pair was for about 3 years. And in that 3 year pair, that 3 year period, that pair of great horned owls had one owlet. Charles and Sarah, in that same 3 year period, had 10. What do real estate folks always say? What's the most important thing about a piece of property? Location, location, location. And animal territory, animal habitat is animal real estate. Now, also in Forest Park, we do have barred owls, not barn, the ones we looked at with an N, but B-A-R-R-E-D. And we have several pairs of barred owls. I've been very, very fortunate that I've seen 4 species of owls in Forest Park, when I first started to study Charles and Sarah, I had a few sightings of eastern screech owls, and we have had very little in the way of eastern screech owl sightings since 2005, essentially none that I'm aware of. And I think that's because the barred owls and great horned owls have been so successful there, and the much smaller eastern screech owls can be prey, not only eaten by great horned owls, but barred owls will eat them as well. And then one very night, walking home from the park, walking through the park, still in the park, after an amazing night with Charles and Sarah, I was very lucky to see a short-eared owl once in Forest Park. So right now in the park, it depends on the time of year how many owls are in Forest Park. I'd say 10 to 20 is a depending on the time of year if they're having young between barred owls and great horned owls, but it could be a little more. Again, challenging to study, but incredibly rewarding to do so. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gonna ask a few more about Forest Park great horned owls, and then I'll finish out with some other from your earlier portion of your talk. But I encourage people to look into your owl prowls. That sounds like just an incredible way to spend some time. But we have folks asking, if I go to Forest Park, can you help people begin their owl observation journey? Where should they be looking? Maybe what parts of the park? Do they like dense trees or more open areas?
Excellent. Excellent questions. Um, you're going to find owls in more parts of Forest Park than not. And at the same time, don't hold your breath that you're going to see them. They're very challenging for all of these reasons. There will be nights where I need over an hour to find one of these owls. And it's not just the camouflage, they're highly variable in where they sleep. And these where they sleep for any bird is called a perch or roost site. So just with Charles and company, Charles and his mates will use different perch and roost sites in different seasons, and not, oh, 5 for the fall and 7 for the winter. In each season, Charles and his mates will use at least 10 to 15 different trees, if not 15 to 20, if not over 20. Well, here's where it gets even more challenging. Will they repeat places spring after spring, summer after summer? Yes and no. Some trees will be used for years and then they stop being used. Other trees have never been used, then out of nowhere they start being used. And of course, trees come to an end. This is Charles and Sarah in a tree that was dead at the time and fell down many years ago, probably a better part of a decade ago. Very memorable tree for them. It's where I first got to see them and was able to photograph them perched next to each other and could really see that difference. So, very memorable day, December 17th, 2006. Not that I remember these things. In terms of where's Charles, where's May, I don't answer that question in or provide the location of other owls, especially in a public forum. But if you come out on an owl prowl, send me an email. Again, I lead about 70 a year. It's pretty easy to schedule one. It's kind of like having dinner with somebody. Like, we're going to find a date that works for both of us. I will show you chapter and verse. As you heard, I'm not from Missouri originally, but I've really come to respect the spirit, the ethos of the show me state. So if you show me that you're serious and willing to spend some time and effort, I will show you everything I can. And as I've mentioned, I mentor people about owls, and I teach those folks, and they grow and learn, and a whole community of people has grown out of these owls. But if you want to start looking for owls, one of the best places to start looking is your local library. and doing research on owls, uh, learning about the different species, and yes, some ways to find them, looking on the ground for their pellets and droppings, getting to know their calls, getting to recognize warning calls of other birds and mammals. It's a great way to find predators: owl, hawk, snake, your neighbor's cat. All of those things are all part of the journey of finding owls. And the research part of this is huge. I mean, I mentioned some of my owl books behind me. I have over 50 books on owls, and the research never stops. So thank you. Excellent questions.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question now about the baby owls. One thought is, do they call or vocalize? Can you hear them? Is that how you can find them? Um, it was also fascinating to learn about their sequential raising. I hadn't realized that, and a lot of other folks were saying that as well. Can you speak to if you've noticed any nest dynamics? Is it hard for the youngest owl if there's a huge one right there competing for mom's beak? Have you noticed anything with the young owl?
Oh, fantastic questions. If you find that I forgot one of these many aspects, please remind me. I'll try and start. I'll try and go in the order. Yes, the owlets do vocalize. All young owls make a call called a begging cheep, and the exact sound of the begging cheep is different from species to species, but generally it's kind of a raspy, hissing uh, type of call. With great horned owls, it sounds like this. And a begging sheep is a young owl saying, "Mom, Dad, we're over here and we're hungry." And da 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 la la la. It's been 4 seconds. We're going to do it again and again and again. Begging cheeps can be made hundreds of times in one night by young owlets. Some owlets, including young great horned owls, they can throw their voice. You can be looking right at them, and you'll hear their call to the left or the right or behind them. So the begging cheeps can be helpful. Um, you were also asking about. I'm so glad you guys were intrigued by the age order, the different egg laying times, and then the age hatching times. This is another fancy term. This is called asynchronous laying, asynchronous hatching. Just means at different times. And it's generally thought to be kind of a hedging of the bets by the parents that if times are tough, the older, bigger, stronger will make it, and maybe the youngest won't. But if things are good, we'll be able to take care of them and feed all of them. In birds of prey, sibling fratricide is documented. It's not incredibly common, but it does happen where, I just ate my little brother, and because there wasn't enough food and he was small enough that I could do that. But that's just with great horned owls, that's rarely been observed. And it can be really interesting to watch that difference in maturation. In 2013 and 2014, Charles and Sarah had three owlets for the first time in consecutive years. And yes, the eggs were laid asynchronously, they hatched asynchronously, and they fledged asynchronously. But in both of those years, the third owlet, once the older owlets had moved out, that third owlet went, "Oh, I'm just gonna stretch out and enjoy having some more space." And they were in not much of a hurry to leave the nest, and they needed a little extra encouragement. As the fifth of six kids, I can relate to this a little. Um, but just back to the owlet's vocalization, um, and perhaps I'm anticipating the question here. When I named the owlets, I have given them names that inform, describe generally as sex, male, female. I have no idea if I'm right. I have about a 50-50 shot of being right or wrong. So I'm always open to the fact that, oh, yes, I named them Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, and it was actually Patty, Selma, and Maggie, what have you. With three of the last four Owlets that Charles had with Sophie, for the first time ever, I got to hear early versions of the juvenile calls. So I got to hear Neil in 2021 hoot very briefly, and Neil was indeed a male. Well, the next year they had Betty and Sydney. Betty named for Betty White, Sydney for Sydney Poitier. And I was able to, a couple of times and film it, hear each of them call. And Betty was actually more of a Bertram. And Sydney, named after Sydney Poitier, a male human, Sydney was more Sydney with a Y. And I was not embarrassed. I was like, okay, I took a shot and I knew I had a 50-50 shot of being right or wrong. Naming the owlets and identifying them by sex, it's not quite what engineers refer to as a WAG, a WAG, a wild ass guess. Again, I've got about a 50-50 shot of being right or wrong. Did I answer first of all, thank you for these great questions. Did I answer all the parts of this question?
You did, and I will ask one final one. We had a couple questions about habitat and how these, especially with the barn owl that you began with, how they're, strong cavity nesters. Um, we had a question about snags on a property, kind of from a practical lens of wanting to maintain owl habitat on a property. But do you have perspective on what sorts of standing trees with cavities are? Is there any pattern in like, oh, owls seem to really like this kind of standing dead tree? Or is there a certain point where maybe someone can cut it down and not feel like they're destroying owl habitat? And I think that, yeah, we'll finish up.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for these questions. And Lily, thank you for facilitating so well. Um, some trees develop cavities more frequently than others. Sycamores and cottonwoods often develop cavities from disease, damage, rot, insects, combinations thereof. If you have a tree on your property and it's dying, as long as that tree is not a danger to health, it's not going to fall on someone's head, it's not going to fall on somebody's car. If it's not a danger to property or health of other things, keep that dead tree around. It may never get touched by an owl, but it's going to be used by so many different types of insects, which will then attract other animals. Case in point, you have a dying tree, woodpeckers attracted to the insects. Woodpeckers make their woodpecker nests. Eastern screech owls are almost exclusively nesting in small hollows in trees. Other owls are more flexible in their nest sites. Just with great horned owls, the key thing with great horned owls, and going back to that huge geographic range, great horned owls nest in more different sites and places than any other, not just owls in the Americas, but every other bird in the Americas. We could all go out to our local park and find a robin's nest. We know what it looks like. We all agree what they look like. Someone could take us to a bald eagle's nest with no bald eagles there and say that's a bald eagle nest. And we would say, oh, yeah, that's sure. That's the largest animal made structure on the planet. With great horned owl nests, unless you have a pair actively nesting, or someone like me who knows a thing or three about great horned owls and can tell you about a historical nest, you can't say that's a great horned owl nest. Um, so one other thing is that owls will often, I'll rephrase that, owls will respond and use nest boxes. And barn owls, again, if you have the other things that barn owls like, barn owls can and will use nest boxes. Nest boxes I always urge caution and patience with. A nest box is not the movie A Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. You could set up a nest box for a barn owl and no one uses it. Or you can set up a nest box for species A and it gets used by species Q. You have to have realistic expectations and really have an understanding, or if you don't have an understanding or need that understanding supplemented, reach out to folks and say, hey, would this work for this type of owl in this area where my property is located? I had an interesting email conversation a few years ago with a very nice lady who said, I live here and I've been trying to attract eastern screech owls for years. And I set up a nest box here, nothing. I set one up here, nothing. And perhaps I should have asked the question earlier, but I think she probably should have offered this information independently and very early on. About 4 emails later, she finally tells me, oh, yeah, I have great horned owls and barred owls all over the place. And I thought, ma'am, you could set out, the most amazing eastern screech owl nest box with all those great horned owls and barred owls around that can eat and will eat eastern screech owls. You're not going to get an eastern screech owl who's trying to commit suicide. Um, so natural cavities and man-made spaces, just to touch on barn owls, one of the reasons for the decline in many areas for barn owls, and again, Missouri is a nice success story, and that's not always the case, is that with less and less small scale agriculture for many years, you've had fewer barns. And so barn owls have had fewer places to go. Small scale agriculture that has had some resurgence in the last 20 plus years, but being so dependent on a sheltered space, whether it's a tree cavity or a barn or an abandoned building, they really need those. Barn owls don't have to be necessarily out in grassland. They can sometimes be quite adaptable to human habitation as long as they have enough of those sheltered spaces and, yes, prey. I am 98% certain in the spring of 2006 that I heard very distinctive hissing, screaming, much more screech than a screech owl's call, but that I heard barn owls calling in an abandoned building in downtown St. Louis. And I thought, okay, is it grassland? Is it prairie? No, but there's probably a fair amount of rodents around here, and this abandoned building is giving them shelter. Um, so the nest usage is with owls can be sometimes very specific to one species, and others are somewhat more flexible. And then you have great horned owls that are incredibly flexible. But yeah, if you can keep a dead or dying tree around your property and safe, that's going to become a little ecosystem on its own. And will you get an owl? Will you not get an owl? Hard to say, but let other animals use it too. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. And again, thank you for that great presentation. Such a joy. And thank you for fielding our questions. And I'll pass it over to Amanda to let us know about some events coming up.
You are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark and Lily, for fielding our questions. Like one of our viewers said in the chat, this isn't the sort of job you probably find on Craigslist.
And I should note, as you may have referred from the intro, this is not my full-time job. And anyone can do this. I am a naturalist. I mean, if you had told me 19 years ago, Mark, you're going to be studying owls and giving presentations on owls, I would have said, That's very nice. But I am a little worried about your mental and or emotional health because that was nowhere on my radar. Yes, into animals all my life, but anyone can do this. Doesn't matter what you studied in school, how you earn your living, where you live, how tall you are, do you need reading glasses or not? Anyone can do this.
It's inspirational, Mark. I really do think that you are living a lot of people's dream.
Oh, thank
So
you.
thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And I know so many people have been in the chat and in the Q&A just relaying their interest and reaching out to you as soon as possible in order to coordinate some of those owl prowls with you. And, to that, I also want to say thank you so much to our viewers this evening for sending your really awesome insights and questions our way. I also put in the chat that we're going to try our best to answer some more of those in our follow-up email that'll be sent out tomorrow. I also want to give a couple of announcements before we conclude today's webinar. Um, First, MPF has two guided short-ear owl hikes planned for early 2025, one of our own prairies and then also on an MDC property. You can join Jeff Cantrell, MPF Technical Advisor, on Friday, February 7th, for our first of two short ear owl hikes. This one is to occur at Pleasant Run Creek Prairie in Vernon County, Missouri. Next, you can join Jeff Cantrell on Friday, February 28th, for short ear owl hike at Shawnee Trail Conservation Area in Benton County, Missouri, or Barton County, Missouri. Both of these hikes are free with the option to donate to MPF. Both have separate registrations online, and both will begin at 4:30 p.m. on those days. Jeff has offered these hikes in the past, actually earlier this year in 2024. And so I'll bet spots will be filling up for next year's event. Couldn't help myself. All right, next, register now and plan to join us on Zoom Wednesday, December 18th at our usual time of 4 p.m. for our MPF webinar, Prairie Planting Establishment and Stewardship, a Q&A with Jared Hubner. Prairie plantings provide multiple benefits, including wildlife and pollinator habitat, cattle forage, stormwater management, and erosion control, and beauty. In this free Q&A webinar, MPF's Director of Prairie Management, Jared Hubner, will briefly lay out the basics of site preparation, seeding, invasive species control, and prescribed fire. He'll also devote the rest of the webinar to answering your questions. Registration for these hikes, webinars, and more can all be found at our website under the Events tab. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and I want to wish you all a great evening. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us.
You're very welcome, Amanda. Thank you so much to you and Lily for having me. Um, just one quick note, if there's some
Sure.
way that you might be able to send me the contents of the chat. I can't chat and answer and so
Yeah,
forth. That
yeah.
I always love seeing people's questions and comments and feedback. I always am trying to improve and hone my presentation. So thank you if you can do that, and thank you to everyone for attending. And I really appreciate your interest and passion and your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll get a transcript for you. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much for everybody who's joined us tonight. Good night.
Good night. Take care.